With a population of more than 2.8 million, Albania is a rather small country situated in the beautiful mountainous region at the helm of the mesmerizing Adriatic Sea. Unfortunately, it is also among the poorest countries in all of Europe, with an estimated GDP of just over $18 million, a 2021, which is lower than all the countries in Europe. Albania is a very poor country and unfortunately is notorious for being a corrupt nation. However, today, it is safe to say that the country is seeing better times compared to what it went through more than 30 years ago under the brutal regime of a dictator who was wholly inspired by Stalin's oppressive and repressive regime. In the mid-80s, Albania was a communist state on the brink of economic collapse due to the selfish and corrupt policies of the ruling elite. Albania, under the rule of Enver Hoxha, was akin to that of North Korea and was equal in all aspects except for, perhaps, its picturesque location and geographical longevity. In light of this, we're going to talk about Enver Hoxha, his paranoia, and how he single-handedly brought the country to its knees with his merciless governance. Enver Hoxha and Kim Il-sung were both leaders of authoritative states, ruling with an iron fist. Quite frankly, both dictators shared the same style and vigor of governance, specifically when you talk in the context of oppressive cults, of character and personality. With that being said, we're going to break down and talk about some parallels that each leader had in common regarding their style of leadership. Let's start with Enver Hoxha. Hoxha was able to propagate an idealistic, almost hero-like personality around himself, focusing on creating an ultimate path to lead his people down the road of socialism. The dictator's image was ubiquitous in the eyes of Albanian citizens, and when he gave public speeches, Hoxha demanded utmost loyalty from his subjects. Similarly, Kim Il-sung also concentrated his efforts on harboring a totalitarian personality, extensively marketing himself as the only great leader who could captain his people to economic and social prosperity. Being the founding father of North Korea, Il-sung's image was pervasive and his words were absolute. He sought unwavering loyalty from his people, which led to the development of the notorious Juche ideology. Pushing the idea of total self-reliance, Enver Hoxha implemented a tyrannical system of controlling the flow of information and communication within the Albanian state, suppressing political dissidents and shunning the right to free speech. He persevered to shape the narrative to further solidify his rule. This resulted in continuous political exiles enforced by the state police, and a culture of threats and imminent imprisonment prevailed. Similarly, Kim Il-sung implemented very strict control over the state media, controlling all forms of communication and focusing on portraying himself as the absolute leader of North Korea. Political dissidence was not tolerated, and people were often executed or sent to labor camps as punishment. Towards the end of World War II in 1944, Albania fought for its freedom and independence from the clutches of German rule with the help of Albanian revolutionists and communist parties. The coalition emerged victorious, and in 1946 the People's Republic of Albania was formed. During this time, Hoxha's government formed and maintained bilateral ties with the Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin. However, during the 50s, ideological differences between the two countries started to emerge, and in 1961, Hoxha announced that his government would be going their separate ways, breaking all ties with the Soviet Union when Nikita Khrushchev came to power. From 1961 to 1978, after breaking ties with the Soviet Union, Hoxha's regime sought ties with China, forming a close relationship with Mao Zedong and seeking his support. This was the era when Albania and China became very staunch allies. Hoxha also implemented Mao's oppressive policies and radical isolationist movements. Political purges, wrongful imprisonments, and kidnapping were rampant under Hoxha's iron rule. After Hoxha died in 1985, while his rule was seemingly over, the political aspects and ideologies continued to shape the country for many decades to come. while the subsequent regimes moved away from the dictator's isolationist political policies and sought partnership with the global community. His leadership did have a lasting impact. More than 2 decades ago in 1991, the now director of the Albanian Authority for Access to Information on ex-Sigurimi files, Gentiana Sula, took part in the public outrage and protest, participating in the historic day where the people toppled the statue of Enver Hoxha. Although the communist regime ended in Albania over 3 decades ago, the people still had to deal with the remnants of past abuses and extrajudicial policies. For so many years, Albania lived under an atmosphere of fear, prejudice, and constant surveillance. Hoxha led a violent and brutal regime and was responsible for thousands of disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and kidnappings. Even today, some 4,000 people are still missing. The dictator's primary system of surveillance was his notorious secret police, known only as the Sigurimi. It was a secretive network of agents and policemen, comprising up to 15,000 collaborators. Among this team were 1,000 agents and more than 11,000 informers spread all across Albania. Everywhere from hotels and restaurants to post offices, stores and embassies, the Sigurimi kept a watchful eye and ears to the ground. No one was safe. Under Enver Hoxha's regime in Albania, economic mismanagement was a persistent issue, leading to long-term repercussions for the country. The isolationist economic policies pursued by Hoxha had significant consequences, and they can be compared to North Korea's economic struggles. Hoxha's decision to break ties with both the Soviet Union and China and pursue isolationist policies left Albania virtually cut off from the global economy. This isolation severely limited trade opportunities and economic partnerships with other nations. Enver Hoxha's decades-long dictatorship in Albania had very drastic and damaging consequences for the country. His rule resulted in severe political repression and economic fragility. Political dissidence was met with swift, extrajudicial action, and people who were even remotely suspected of being disloyal to Hoxha's regime were persecuted and arrested without due process, some of whom were falsely executed. In addition, Hoxha's regime was also responsible for developing forced labor camps where political prisoners were held and tortured. They were labeled as rogue elements of the state, and some of them were pronounced as being terrorists. Regardless, each prisoner in the labor camp had to contend with hard conditions, and many would lose their lives, dying of malnutrition, forced labor, and torture. The dictator also ordered the mass killing of the people he suspected of being dissidents or disloyal to the regime. Hoxha's network of spies, informants, and police carried out purges daily. What's more, it was very typical of Hoxha to frequently oust members within his regime. He was known to remove his party members by force, either sending them to labor camps or having them executed. Moreover, the Hoxha regime had zero tolerance for religious practices. He led a centrally atheistic campaign, which resulted in Christians, Muslims, and other minorities being persecuted. He closed down churches and mosques and sent religious leaders to prison. After the subsequent fall of communism in Albania, which was in the early 1990s, the oppressed state experienced a robust and revolutionary transformation, lifting the veil of propaganda. The revolution emerged when the government let go of its illegal control of the state media, thereby advocating for free media and free speech. This resulted in the systematic proliferation of various print and electronic media outlets, and the narrative of the people shifted to outing Hoxha's repressive rule, emphasizing the necessity of political, social, and economic reforms. The post-communist era in Albania came with a more pluralistic and free media landscape, adopting a more diverse landscape of public opinion and welcoming the viewpoints of its citizens. You have to understand that it was the media that played an instrumental role in shaping public opinion and discourse, ruthlessly dismantling and unraveling the brutality and tyranny of Hoxha's government. However, in contrast, North Korea was not this fortunate. The totalitarian regime gained more strength, and the supreme leader exercised even more oppressive tactics to control the state's media, monopolizing it to the core. Up to this day, All information and news comprise state narratives. In addition, North Korea still uses propaganda as a powerful tool to further tighten its grip on its citizens, compelling them to uphold the government ideology and maintain the cult of personality, recognizing and glorifying its leaders as the only people who can bring them salvation.